excited to be doing this, and very happy, especially for Will's help in organizing it. Will is a major part of the techonomy community, and he's written for us quite a few times. It's also extremely pertinent for us this week, not only because it's World Water Day, but because a week from today, Techonomy is hosting its debut Techonomy Climate Conference in Mountain View, in the heart of Silicon Valley, very deliberately there to discuss tech's role in climate and the tech industry's role in climate. And we have really had a tremendous response to that program. We've got 35 speakers in the course of 24 sessions over the course of a very packed day. Major figures like Catherine Hayhoe, who's one of the world's leading climate scientist explainers from the University of Texas, Catherine McKenna, who was until last summer the Environment and Climate Minister of Canada, Fred Krupp, President of the Environmental Defense Fund, venture capitalist Andrew Beebe, and of Obvious Ventures, Mia Diawara, of Lower Carbon Capital, aptly named, and a raft of fantastic startups, session on climate justice and environmental justice, and just a really stunning program in person, but also free to attend virtually. So I hope that all of you will come one way or another. And Kendall, would you put the link to the climate conference in the chat so everybody can see it? Kendall, who is something of a professional performer among her other things that she does here at Techonomy, is the one who came up with that excellent water playlist, starting with great Creedence Clearwater. So let me just quickly introduce the panelists. As I mentioned, Will Sarni, a major techonomist, is CEO and founder of Water Foundry. He's an author, serial author, and a consultant. And Will, just define what you do, because I always have a little trouble defining that.
So David, a bit of a troublemaker, an unreasonable person that doesn't really settle for the status quo, and passionate about water.
Nice. Okay, good. Erin Rothman is also CEO and founder of Storm Sensor, which is a startup that's doing extremely well. Will recently, with a co-host, did a podcast interview of Erin, which I listened to this morning, actually, which is really worth. What's your podcast called again, Will?
The Stream with Will and Tom.
The Stream with Will and Tom. So you can learn more about Erin at that, or learn a lot about water in general there. I'm going to ask Erin in a minute to explain Storm Sensor. Since we don't have Dragan Savić, who's CEO of KWR Water Research Institute in the Netherlands, right? Is that where he is?
Yeah.
Yes. Maybe he'll show up, maybe he won't. If he doesn't, there is at least one major water expert in the audience that we might draft to join us at some point. But let's get started with our panel here. And maybe the way to start would be, Will, with you. When we think about digital technology and digital transformation in water, why is digital transformation so relevant to the world of water?
Sure. My point of view is that the most significant trend in the world of water is, in fact, adoption and transformation of the water sector via digital technologies. And I cast a very wide net on digital, which is everything from data acquisition, analytics using satellites, IoT devices, smart homes, smart water homes, smart precision agriculture, smart manufacturing, basically smart anything that gives you the ability to collect data and turn it into actionable information. And the way I think about it, and really how I framed it in my book, Digital Water Tech, is that it has happened in every other aspect of our lives. Every other sector has adopted digital technologies to varying degrees, and it's been transformative. whether it's mobility, ride sharing, healthcare, education, in particular during the pandemic, certainly entertainment, music. And finally, it's showing up in the world of water in a big way, fueled by the pandemic out of sheer necessity. So just think about the ability to collect data and turn it into actionable information in a world that's impacted by climate change and aging infrastructure, outdated public policy, essentially fill in the blank.
Very good opening description. And I think as a case in point, Erin's company essentially exemplifies pretty much everything you just said. So Erin, tell us what you do.
Sure. So at Storm Sensor, we work with cities, primarily cities across the United States right now, and we track how water moves through their storm sewer and their coastal systems. We also tie that data to weather and climate conditions so cities can understand how all of those, like both the water and climate intelligence and infrastructure all kind of interact together. And then they'll use that data for everything from public education to emergency response and long-term capital improvement planning.
So it's an Internet of Things company, among other things, right? I mean, so you use the sensors are of your own design and are deployed, and are they how are they connected? Is it using 5G yet, or is it traditional cell phone networks? Is it Wi-Fi? Talk a little bit about how it works, just quickly.
We use LoRa right now. So that means that the sensors connect to a LoRa gateway. That allows us to, it's a low power.
Is that an acronym? Is LoRa
low power, long range, may or may not be the acronym. But because it's low power, it allows us to extend battery life fairly significantly, which we're not able to do with cell at this time. We're working on that and anticipate releasing the cell option later this year. And then that LoRa gateway communicates via cell to the cloud. And we transfer data every 5 minutes. So
you have sensors in what kinds of places? Will, just forgive me, I want to drill down on this and then we'll come back to you with some big picture.
This is good, David. This is very good.
Okay.
We have sensors under bridges, in combined sewer systems, so outside of tide gates, in collection systems, in stormwater ponds, basically anywhere that we're dealing with sewer or stormwater flow data, we're monitoring how that water is moving.
And the point is to do what? It's to help municipalities in particular manage water in general, but also predict consequential events, particularly storm circumstances. Is that a fair summary?
Exactly. So we'll start, in many cases, we'll put together an urban flood risk index, we call it SURFR, and that identifies where within the community their highest risk areas are, or the highest ROI. We'll deploy data networks in those locations so they can understand how these storm systems that come through, how these storms are impacting their systems, whether they're tidally impacted or not. And we can look at peak flow conditions and available capacity. We can look at return to baseline conditions within these systems, and then they can use that information for everything. Like one city uses it to close intersections. It's kind of like an early notification for flooding for them. So they'll close intersections and redirect traffic based on the data that we're sending them. They'll do maintenance based on system performance given different storm events, because storms have different characteristics related to intensity and duration, and also frequency, of course, is important. So the IDF, each one of those components affects how a system performs. So there are any number of applications, both on the flooding side as well as looking at opportunities for resilience.
There's tons more but one more question, and then I want to ask Will some big picture questions about a little more about why we need all this. But so what would be the single biggest reason that, the customers are typically cities?
Typically, yeah.
And what are they trying to accomplish by purchasing your system?
I would say the biggest single use case is flooding, but not just flooding, what is causing flooding within a given area and to what extent.
Yeah. It's interesting. There was a hurricane last summer in New Jersey, and I have a friend who lives in some place called Milltown, which is right near Rutgers, where he teaches actually. And he is in a relatively low spot, but his building flooded. His
Mhm.
the entire ground floor flooded like 4 feet. And it was because somebody in the neighboring town forgot to turn a switch that closed a sluice gate or something that
Yeah.
is there, but was not operated, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just,
Exactly.
I mean, and he has had a hellish year because of that, had to replace his floors and his walls up to 4 feet and all, so this is real. But now back to you, Will. Historically, technology and water really haven't gone together, right? I mean, and talk a little bit about the journey from where we've been in the past and what the world has been like historically to where we are now.
Well, this is an opportunity for me to make a crack that the Romans would recognize our water infrastructure. That's how dated it is. And Erin's laughing. I mean, in some ways, we sort of have a
I'm
similar.
laughing with you. Yes.
No, well, that's good. I'll take it either way. But so where this journey where it started was essentially analog. And I started my career as a hydrogeologist. So I would go out in the field and measure water levels with a steel tape and chalk and record it in a notebook. And Erin, I'm interested in your take, but that's still fairly common in terms of manual measurement of water levels, collecting samples for water quality analysis in a lab. And that's archaic. And it's archaic for a number of reasons. The stresses that we now have on our hydrologic cycle, how we manage water, are profound. And one could argue at the breaking point. And you just can't do that with manual data collection and analytics. So you really do need real-time data, what Erin is doing on volume of water, have the ability to get into predictive analytics in terms of anticipating events. And also this applies to water quality. So real-time water quality monitoring is the other side of the coin, and that is slowly scaling in adoption also. And, climate change is just making this more profound, more urgent in the scheme of things. So that's the journey we're on in the world of water, going from that, send people in the field and have this incredible lag between data collection and knowledge. And Erin, one of the things that I was impressed with was, really your aha moment when you realize that, well, there is a better way. We don't need to be doing this manually anymore. Like, why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
it's interesting. Related to that, one of our new customers, they do manual data collection to see when they have combined sewer overflows. So they open up, they've got 50. And every week and every time it rains, they go to every single manhole, they open it up, they have a block attached to a rope that's attached to the manhole, and they see if the block's on one side or the other. If it's on the other side, they'll make a note that there's a CSO, pick it up, move it.
What is a CSO?
A combined sewer overflow system.
This is before they use your product.
Before they use our system. Yeah. So basically within a month.
But is that kind of, even to this day, typical in most American cities? That kind of crudeness?
It is. That's to what Will said, that the Romans would recognize our systems. So many of them are so old. It's expensive to retrofit. And if you don't know how they're functioning or where the issues are, it doesn't make sense to spend money to fix something that you don't understand.
Yeah, it reminds me of the electrical grid, which until recently in pretty much everywhere, the only way utilities knew when power was out somewhere was if somebody called them and told them. Now, I know at least where I live, they now have sensors that seem to give them a very good ability to, this is relatively new, but they have a map whenever there's an outage, and you can go and see exactly where, up to this point on the street, there's no power, and how many hours they expect before it's remediated, which is huge progress. But they also had a system, and still have, I'm sure, in many places, where they basically don't know what's going on in their infrastructure. Let me just quickly throw in a question I hadn't realized I would want to ask, but we had this 1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that did pass last year. Will this make a dent in your world? Either one of you? Do we know?
Erin, you go first.
Yes. So we're working that there's a pretty significant component of that bill that focuses on climate resilience and climate adaptation. And because the work that we're doing focuses so heavily on flooding, and flooding, at least on the eastern half of the United States, is anticipated to increase both due to climate change and increased frequency and intensity of different storm events, as well as aging infrastructure and also in areas that are lower income. So all of those are kind of like, I guess, a perfect storm as far as the problem that we're trying to solve. And most of the cities that we're working with are applying for funding for these programs.
No, that's good news.
Wonderful.
Just quickly for the audience, I know Kendall told you this in the chat, but we really hope to get your comments and questions. Use the Q&A function for that, and I will, with Kendall's help and Caitlin's help, who's also on here, monitor those. I don't know how many of you saw the news, but I just read in the Guardian this morning that temperatures were just recorded, I think yesterday or the day before, in Antarctica that were 14 degrees centigrade higher than ever recorded.
Well,
14 degrees. That was yesterday. And also there's an unprecedented convergence right now where temperatures are dramatically and unusually high at both the North and the South Poles. And they were quoting several climate scientists, including James Hansen, saying, yeah, we have all these models and they predicted this kind of thing was going to happen, but it's happening now. And we did not expect that it would happen this fast, this soon. So the dramatic consequences of climate change are going to hit faster and harder than anybody thought. And there's evidence of that now. And we've certainly all experienced extreme weather in recent years, and brace yourself, there will be more. But, you know, Will, you said a great thing as we were prepping for this, which I found quite insightful and relevant. You said, climate change will be felt through water. That's a good line. Talk about that.
I wish I could claim that that was an original quote or something like it. But, you know, what you see really, you know, you see water professionals talking about this and climate professionals talking about it, that the primary impact from climate change will be in water. And it ranges from aridification in the American West, not the drought, to extreme weather events and flooding that Erin's company addresses. So it's really both, coupled with, you know, the impacts of poor water quality from flooding events and extreme weather events and so on. So, yeah, very much I view this as an encouraging sign that climate professionals and water professionals are now starting to hang out together and view this as an integrated set of challenges that we can solve. And Erin, I want to pick on you again, but one of the things that I found really, really interesting when Tom and I chatted with you was essentially your value proposition went from water tech to water and climate tech. And you have a fully integrated value proposition that resonates with the climate professionals and the water professionals. And that's really interesting. And I think worth chatting about for a moment.
Yeah, please.
Certainly. So we were thinking about the work that we did, and we were looking at our value proposition and how what we do matters. And as a team, we realized that ultimately we viewed ourselves almost as a climate tech company that focuses on water, because, you know, as Will said, that the climate change is going to be felt in water, and our customers are dealing with it. A few years ago, when I started the company, and I first started talking to investors, they laughed at me and told me that I'm talking about plumbing and no one gives a shit about plumbing. And I'm thinking, but I'm talking about storms and climate change and hurricanes. And then hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria hit in 2017. And it was like a flip switched. And everyone understood why we were doing what we were doing, but we hadn't we hadn't really put that into a value proposition as a company yet. And we did that back in 2020. And what it's allowed us to do is, like Will said, we're working with both the sustainability and resiliency teams at cities, and we're also working with public works and stormwater with providing the same solution. And at the same time, it gives our team and our company the freedom to look beyond what's happening within a sewer and to look into what's happening with, the weather and the climate and the trends that we're seeing, and tie all of that together and really provide that intersection. And it's been a lot of fun.
I notice on your website, you are labeling, you say your sub tagline is a climate technology company.
Mm-hmm.
And I know from listening to Will's podcast that did help you raise money, but it really is true. And that's what's interesting and pertinent to our climate conference next week. As we were preparing for that, I think Caitlin, who's on, will agree. We have been astonished at the range of companies that are emerging in climate tech.
Mm-hmm.
There's almost no sphere of human activity that cannot be intervened with technology to make it more, efficient in a climate sense. And we need that technology radically. Just why a company called Lower Carbon Capital can basically have a portfolio of like 40 companies, and it's not the slightest bit of a stretch. Kendall, let's add Tom, and we're going to ask him to introduce himself. Erin, you know Tom also?
I do.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I don't really, so he's going to have to introduce himself. But in the absence of Dragan, who we're really sorry to not have, another water expert has been here in the audience, and we're going to promote him to panelist just to kind of broaden and deepen the conversation a little bit. In the meantime, one of the things that I guess you told me, Will, I guess, or I saw somewhere in this prepping, that one of the things that makes life so difficult now in a radically radical climate crisis, I guess I should say, is that the past is no longer a guide to the future. That we can't. So talk about that a little bit. Maybe both of you could comment on that.
Sure. And this is one of the profound changes that we have seen, which is there's something called stationarity, which consulting engineers, scientists use as a way to plan for the future. So you can look at the past several decades in terms of 100-year flood event, 10-year flood event, things like that, cycles of drought and so on, and use that to plan infrastructure, plan cities. That is woefully broken now. And that's broken because of climate change. So now looking into the future, well, how do you design infrastructure when the past can't be a guide? You use climate models, you use, scenario planning, things like that as a way to understand what centralized infrastructure might look like, but also potentially different types of infrastructure like localized, decentralized, off-grid, smart homes, and so on. And that's a big deal. A really big deal. And, the American West is tragically a good example of where that's happening and what's happening in the Colorado River Basin right now.
Well, maybe that's a question for both of you too, is, when you look at the state of water in the United States, and particularly in the West, although I'm sure comments can be made for any region, how bad of a water crisis are we facing and might we face? Erin, say something about
that. Well, I would say we talk, or I don't know if we talk, there have been a number of articles and studies done that look at climate migration. And I think one of the major drivers of climate migration that we'll see in the States is the lack of water in the American West, because we're not recharging groundwater. Whatever is there is evaporating. The stormwater that we manage is punted off through concrete channels into the ocean. And we're exacerbating a dire situation as it stands right now with our current approach.
Well, obviously, technology in general is not going to create new water, right? So how is tech going to help with that? Either one of you.
I'll dive in, so to speak. Oh, and there's Tom.
Okay, we'll get to you in 1 second, Tom. Welcome, and we'll find out all about you in just one moment. Thank you for being here and for being quick on the draw.
David, that's a great question. And it's a complex answer. It's technology alone will not solve these problems, but technology can be a catalyst for change and has inherent value. So, we talked about data collection, actionable information, and so on. What really has to change is public policy, utilities, multinationals, the investor community that I would say historically, and perhaps for the most part, doesn't know what to do with water tech that has a long cycle. Water has very different attributes than carbon, and climate tech. So yes, the real poke is with digital tech, but in itself, it can only accomplish so much. So, and there are a number of examples of where digital technologies have been a catalyst for public policy change. So it's an important part.
I mean, you look at some, go ahead, yeah, sorry.
I was just going to give one example of how digitalization of this is a tool. So we're working in a city in Southern California, and they've developed it's not green infrastructure, but they're trying to re-infiltrate groundwater. And they're using these capture systems, and they're using our networks to monitor the volume of water that's going through these systems, the volume of water that's staying within them, and the volume of water that's moving out. So they're able to calculate how much water they're actually recharging into the groundwater, with a goal of 1,400 families or households worth of water per year per system. So it's kind of cool to see how it's not like Will said, it's not the technology that's solving the problem, but it's a combination of different tools to understand what works and what they can do in the future.
Okay, interesting. We may come back to some of that, but Tom, welcome. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the last minute invite. Apologies, I'm not perhaps formally dressed as I could well be with 10 minutes notice, but happy to join the conversation. Thank you. So yeah, so I'm an environmental journalist and content creator, and I started specializing in the global water tech sector in about 2010. So I've been writing, interviewing, speaking to people who are kind of, I guess, innovators in the global water space for the best part of over a decade now. I work with Will on the Stream podcast. We co-host it together, and we were fortunate to have Erin as a guest, as well as lots of other wonderful entrepreneurs in the world of water. And I'd say, to use a phrase that Will and I use, I'm an unreasonable person with a bias fraction who likes to get things done. So, and we also like to kind of meet and interview fellow unreasonable people. So thanks for having me on the panel. And the
Atlantean is your media company, or what is that?
Yeah, so Atlantean is my media content agency. So we specialize, we work with public and private companies on content and communication strategy as well.
Cool. Okay. Well, first of all, any comments on anything you've heard or questions for these two that, we've been going for half an hour. Feel free to say anything.
Yeah, I think I largely agree with, it would be very easy to say, yeah, I agree with Will and Erin, of course. But I think from how I see it, digital, because essentially that's what we're talking about here, digital innovation as a catalyst for change. When I started looking at the water industry back in 2010, digital was kind of looked at as smart meters. And that's innovative when it comes to digital. Okay, we're going to change analog meters to smart meters that don't have to be read manually. Now, within the space of the last decade, there's been a phenomenal amount of companies in this space and innovation. And really, I think it's helping to ultimately deliver a more efficient service and can really help drive change, as well as an area that I'm particularly interested in, and maybe like to throw to Will and Erin on this, is how we can just make the water industry more appealing and more attractive to young professionals, just like any other STEM industry, science, technology, engineering, and maths. How can we attract more people to the world of water? Because ultimately there's a big challenge coming down the pike, and that's an aging, soon to be retiring workforce with lots of highly experienced, highly skilled operational engineers that will soon be retiring. And actually, unless you're recruiting the right amount of young professionals into the industry, there's going to be a gap in the workforce. So I think digital has a crucial role to play there as well.
Interesting. Well, one of the things that's come up a couple times, you said, Will, I think companies have to play a big role. You know, it just happens. I was just remembering as I'm sitting here that in my Fidelity retirement account, I own a water ETF, which has performed pretty badly over the last couple of years. I mean, it's maybe a tiny bit. It has not gone up with the market, really. So are there companies, big companies, that are actually really worth praising and are doing the right thing here? Any of you, but who, you know, what are companies that might be leading, if any?
So David, I used to work for an audit advisory firm. So I have to start with a disclaimer that my comments should not be interpreted as investment advice. But
no,
having said
in this
that,
case, you can make investment advice in our context. Nobody's going to sue you, but that's not what we were really trying to get at anyway.
No. So look, there are water technology funds. So, you know, Calvert and Allianz have two. And if you look at them over the past several years, they've actually performed very well up until a few months ago. Again, it's not investment advice. So I find exponential technology companies really interesting and potentially a good investment. So companies like Erin's that are in the digital space, you know, absolutely going to change the industry. Satellite data acquisition analytics companies, you know, Tom works for one or more of those. You know, I've mentored Gybe, GYBE, which is a really interesting satellite data company. Artificial intelligence companies like Pluto Shift. Digital technology companies like KTM that are all about hydraulic modeling and artificial intelligence. So, you know, anything in the digital space are really interesting from a startup perspective. And then you've got, you know, the global companies that are out there. You know, in the US, you've got Xylem that has a whole digital strategy. Danaher has a number of portfolio companies that are focused primarily on treatment, but also data collection. Evoqua, another US company, and then some of the big powerhouses in Europe, like Suez, and, you know, Tom can speak to those. So you've got, you know, the startups, early growth stage companies like Erin's, and then you've got the big companies that are delivering, you know, big technology solutions, pumps, you know, plumbing, and so on, that are looking at digital.
Okay, cool. Please, audience, put things in the Q&A. But Tom, any thoughts on this corporate question?
Yeah, I guess it's where you come in. I mean, you mentioned corporates, so you're talking about the big food and beverage companies, automotive engineering, and actually
public companies in particular. I'm wondering about.
Yeah, like shifting water from being seen as a risk to actually being seen as an opportunity, and looking at the value within water, and particularly actually generating resources or recycling that water on site and beyond to really maximize the use of water on the site. I mean, Will mentioned some of the companies that kind of cross this landscape, and I think coming back to digital and innovation again, which is the heart of this discussion, I think the way some of the companies are going in terms of using satellite-based data that you mentioned, Will, is really, really interesting. I mean, this has come up in the last couple of years, and actually companies that are using software as a service subscription type packages over a number of years, where water utilities can basically subscribe and have indications on where there might be a deterioration of their assets. So imagine the owner of a dam. He's got a 5-kilometer long dam with a very manual inspection team. And actually, with software as a service, there's solutions available now to kind of help pinpoint, based on data of images flying over from satellites, of where there might be an anomaly in that. So it's basically helping asset owners to direct their workforces with more accuracy. And I think that is where it's really exciting. But yeah, there's a whole labyrinth of different companies involved when it comes to water management.
Good. And I want to get to the satellites in a little more detail in a minute, but welcome, Dragan. We missed you, but we're glad you made it. And Dragan is CEO of KWR Water Research Institute. So just quickly tell us what you do, Dragan.
We are a research organization, private company, but not for profit. We work with all Dutch water utilities and internationally, both in Europe and outside, very close to practice, but also quite science-based. And one of the key topics in our work is digital water and hydroinformatics, so water and informatics.
We've been touching on a number of related things. One thing we didn't touch on that I know you're involved in that maybe we could just dive right in and get your perspective is gaming and how it can play a role in this arena, which is probably not the first thing most people would think of. So talk a little bit about why that might matter.
Well, first of all, gaming that doesn't have primarily entertainment objective, but has to have entertainment elements is very important in getting consensus among different parties. For example, what has caused flooding, what are the potential sources or potential actions that we could take. And there is quite a lot of different opinions. And when we talk about technology, we quite often think that technology is the key, but it's the humans. And that's where the technology helps us to bring humans around the same table. And not everybody is digital water expert. Not everybody is expert in simulation and modeling, but through the games, we can get access to that through much more, how would I say it, approachable way, visual way, easy to understand, even for non-technical people. So I think that's the huge advantage of what we call serious gaming. So you get a serious, challenging issue to deal with. So it would be either for getting a consensus among different stakeholders or for training. There is quite a lot of interest. How can we train people? Because lots of people are leaving the water area, the water industry, and lots of people are retiring very soon, taking that expertise away from either organization, utilities, or agricultural water suppliers. So that has to be preserved somehow, and people train to use the technology. So that's another kind of reason for using serious gaming in this case.
Interesting. We're starting to get some interesting comments and questions in the audience. One, which was kind of well phrased, so I'm going to ask it, from Jeremy Mazer. He asked, what would a modern climate resilient water system look like that the Romans would not recognize? That's a good way to ask the question. Anybody who wants to jump in on that?
I made the smart remark, so I'll go first, but I'm anxious to hear from everybody else. If you had a blank sheet of paper, would you design infrastructure the way we've designed it, which is where you get maybe 50% non-revenue water? Would you have centralized systems with a lot of plumbing? Would you have lead pipes? Whatever it may be. So something that the Romans would not recognize would be technologies like air moisture capture, localized treatment systems at the building scale, similar to what Salesforce has in San Francisco, natural infrastructure, that Organica has localized in a neighborhood, smart homes, where you could determine how much water you're using, know when you're going to have a leak in advance, or even know real-time water quality, so you know that it's safe. The Romans would not recognize using renewable energy for treatment plants or desalination plants. They wouldn't know what desal was exactly. So things like that. And sort of going back to the infrastructure bill, and Erin, you're probably closer to it than I am, but I don't see those types of technologies being, advanced or funded. I think there's a lot of investment in current Roman infrastructure. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, you're closer to it. So anyway, that's my take.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of focus on gray infrastructure just because, or I guess the Roman style infrastructure, just because that's what people know, that's what they're comfortable with, that's what we've always done. So why change it? And the problem is that we have a lot of reasons to change it now. And the opportunity.
When you say gray infrastructure, what does that mean exactly outside of the water context?
If you think about like pipes, canals, human constructed conveyance systems.
Cement and steel kind of thing.
Yeah, basically. So if you take that out as an option almost and focus on a per building, and you're able to use green infrastructure, blue infrastructure within that structure, you can direct stormwater runoff into groundwater or wetlands, or what was talking about like the per building treatment plants. There are so many ways that we can do it. And in the infrastructure work that we've been looking at, it's an argument to make that there are alternatives available to us. But the cities that we've been working with are pretty excited about it when we show them the different options and the different ways that we can map how this water could move through a city versus how it does. So I think the opportunities there's just a story that needs to be enthusiastically told as we go.
Good. Okay. I want to just ask one other question that came from the audience because it dovetails a little bit with the non-Roman system question. Steve Cole says, I think we can acknowledge there are too many water utilities in the US. How can digital technology assist utilities to cooperate or even consolidate? Anybody want to comment on that? Is that a rational suggestion? It seems like it might be to me, but I don't know. Geographically, there's obviously considerations. How does that work? Do you guys think there are too many water utilities?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
We have tens of thousands of small to mid-sized utilities that are underfunded and straining from a workforce perspective, big challenges. So my 2 cents, digital technologies provide a incredibly powerful opportunity for small to mid-sized utilities to address the workforce issue. Tom brought it up, Dragan and Erin brought it up also, that, we've got this aging workforce. Well, how do you take new entrants and give them the knowledge that just went out the door? Well, digital technologies such as VR, AR, artificial intelligence give you that ability. There could be some interesting business models in terms of knowledge sharing, technology sharing. Think about a back office for, small to mid-sized utilities within an individual state. So yes, there are opportunities from a digital tech, but also a business model tech that can address all of that. Dragan.
Yeah, I mean, young people aren't going to probably feel comfortable working in the water sector if they can't manage the infrastructure on their phone. And I'm sure today they generally cannot. I mean, it's amazing. The more I learn about Tesla, the more impressed I am. And you can do so much on your phone when you have either a Tesla car or a Tesla battery on your solar system on your house. You can monitor all these things. I mean, that should be true for every water system, and any 25-year-old should be able to come in and use the water system, right? But I bet that can't be done now almost anywhere.
David, can I just
please
respond to that? Yes. And also to your previous question. First of all, if you're talking about a lot small utilities in the States, then we're talking geographically distributed. And that's the physical layer, that's the pipes, that's the treatment works and everything else. But you have the digital layer that doesn't matter where it is. It could be, as you say, on your phone, controlling 10 different utilities. So That's what the digital layer, the cyber layer brings to the management of the system, despite of the geography of the physical system. So that's the big advantage of having digital layer there.
So Dragan, what do you think about the question though? Do you think that capability could ultimately lead to more consolidation among systems, either public or I don't know how, maybe so they have to be privatized in some cases before that would happen. How do you see that possibility?
Well, I see it as sharing of resources, limited resources, particularly for a small utility. You can imagine a big DC or LA or New York utilities, and they have the resources, both human and financial, to get those digital tools and then do it from the phone. Whereas if you're a small utility somewhere in, I don't know, Virginia, you have to rely on the local. If you have this additional layer that can help you better manage your system, then you will get much better kind of a control system, much better and unified processes. Whereas if you have 5, 10 different utilities, they will manage their system in a different way. So you get automation, you get consistency in approach, and you manage it then like a portfolio of different utilities rather than utility by utility.
Well, and also if you think about the interaction of all of that data, and you think that some of these water treatment plants that are managed, they're under capacity, you've got some that are over capacity, being able to manage that and how that water moves through these systems and through communities as we're getting storms or droughts or anything else, that's a huge opportunity to properly manage water or better manage our water.
Wow, Todd Boyd just put in the chat something I did not know, that over 50,000 waste and wastewater utilities in North America alone. That's probably a bad thing. And quickly, Erin, I do want to go to Tom and ask about satellites, but and I want to get back to Dragan on climate also. But Erin, given that you're already sort of, you're a relatively new company, you've got these sensors that are focusing on flooding and in a very specific domain. But given what you've learned about Internet of Things and what's possible, do you see that the kind of thing that you've started in that area could and should, or maybe in some cases already is, being deployed across an entire water ecosystem? And is that even something that you guys might ultimately get involved in? There
are a number of people that are starting to look, because sensors and the IoT focused sensors are pretty low cost. And I think I've been talking to some people who've been deploying these sensors, and the data, they said the sensors are easy, the data is easy to get, it's what you do with it and how you capture it and how you analyze it. So being able to work with these communities to deploy low cost sensors, whether they're ours, whether they're someone else's, and then take that data in and run the algorithms that allow us people to understand how their systems are functioning given different events, is a huge opportunity. And we're starting to see it expand across the country.
Yes, and before to forestall the criticism of my non-male coworkers, to use the gendered pronoun guys probably was an error in my part. I know that sort of thing.
I didn't even notice.
These
doesn't bother me.
So I take it back. Tom, satellites. We have at Techonomy Climate next week. We have an entire panel on satellites in climate management, particularly in emissions management. We have GHGSat's CEO and also one of the project leads at MethaneSat, which is EDF's own satellite that's going up shortly. What's the role of satellites in this arena? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think there's a couple of areas. If you've got asset management, so actually organizations that are responsible for, say, a dam of water or reservoir, actually trying to manually find out where there might be a weakness in that infrastructure. There's definitely, it's been led by a kind of human team beforehand, but actually having satellite can help pinpoint and deploy those human teams with much more accuracy and done automatically as well. You think about how many thousands of images satellites can generate, cross-reference using AI, and then actually pinpoint where there might be a problematic area to then inspect further. When you're talking about assets that are kilometers long, there's enormous potential from that side, but also on, it's more classed as pipeline risk assessment. Some companies are looking at how you can deploy satellite-based images when it comes to water leakage. I mean, I think Will and Dragan mentioned the network of the future will have a less non-revenue water leakage based on 30% being lost right now. But actually, if you can use satellite imagery together with on-the-ground sensors to detect where there is leakage and actually fix and pinpoint where the teams can look, I think there can be a big improvement in how the water is delivered. So that the
sorry, go on.
The short answer is to basically improve and make the delivery of water services way more efficient, harnessing digital tools.
Are you in the UK now, by the way?
I am based in
since
South
you're
Coast,
okay, since you're not an American, you're the best, or Dragan could answer this too. Are there some countries where all this stuff is being done better, like maybe Hong Kong, Singapore, or where is the leading country? I don't know, Finland, Denmark. Where is somebody doing this well? Maybe the Netherlands.
It's a good question. I mean, I think it depends on which innovation you're talking about. I mean, Singapore's often quoted as the hydro hub and a very progressive water utility. It's got quite a diversified water supply between water reuse, between desalination. It's got its multiple tap system. Other European nations are perhaps the Netherlands, as Dragan can comment, is known as the king of resilience, having to have no choice but to be innovative because lots of parts of the country are below sea level. So I think there's different countries are leaders when it comes to different parts of the innovation. In terms of one country that's doing everything well, digital, resilience, water reuse, it's kind of hard. There's lighthouses of innovation all around the world. It would be amazing if they could all come together in one country.
Really quick, and I do want to hear Dragan on climate and water, but Tom, what about the one country in the world whose leaders are most technologically savvy, which is China? How are they doing?
That's a great question with 3 minutes to go, David. I
mean, is there impressive stuff happening there?
Yeah, I mean, China.
They don't have the problem of 50,000. They could make it one. If they have 50,000, they could make it one tomorrow. So, I mean, and they do that sort of thing. So what's going on real fast? And maybe
ultimately, there's still fragmentation of a country divided by multiple water utilities. Unless it's the size of Singapore, where you have a single water agency that can take control, you're still going to face that dilemma wherever you are. Yeah, China's been leading the way when it comes to AI and cybersecurity as well. They've got the enormous north-south water diversion project, which is perhaps one of the biggest feats of engineering, certainly in my lifetime. That's pretty impressive. And they're incorporating a lot of desalination capacity into their water provision as well. So yeah, lots of innovation coming out. But yeah, perhaps Dragan can comment on the Netherlands and China as well.
Yeah, feel free.
Yeah, China is the leader, as you say, in AI and IT, and they are faced with another challenge, which is rapid urbanization, and those two are competing. So you get lots of urban flooding that we don't in the Western world. But as you say, AI is very important. And to touch upon your question of climate and water, I would just try to focus more on the global water security, because this digital kind of digital water will help us get that multidimensional and enduring human goal of water security in the changing climate, droughts, floods, landslides, desertification, pollution, epidemics and disease, and disputes and conflicts. All of those are something that we want to solve for the humanity. And don't forget that 70% globally water is being used for agriculture. Let's not just focus on the urban areas. We need to also look into how satellites are helping, irrigate and get the plants to grow in the most efficient way. So in that sense, I would say, again, the technology is in the service of the human. So please don't forget the human in this loop of the technology use and development.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, Will warned me that you were extremely authoritative. Carl had a question, and because Carl has been a longtime part of the techonomy community and another water expert, I thought maybe we should just put him on briefly. We can go a little bit past 2 if everybody's okay with that. Since we had a little bit of a makeshift arrangement, and it's good. And we have now 6 people on screen. Carl, first quickly tell us what you do and then ask your comment or question or whatever.
Hey guys, Carl Ganter here. It's great to see everybody. Big fan of everyone on the screen here, and I'm sure everybody who's tuned in. I run Circle of Blue. We cover water issues globally. Also founder of Vector Center, where we're using AI to, in a sense, chart better paths and foresight for water and water supplies. So, Will, you always talk about the status quo. It's our enemy. And being a former television news guy, believe it or not, in Chicago, you've got to run on the story. But we also look and see what are the biggest things that are holding us back. Because David just talked about, the temperatures in the Arctic and Antarctic. We have to move fast. And so how do we scale these solutions? And to the last point here too, how do we scale the people response? Because it's all about people. It's all about policy, and it's all about the investment part. So that's my kind of hairball question. Or are there real accelerants that we just need to get behind and push forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. Anybody want to jump on that? Please, Will.
We need better business models. I would say that's part of it. We see that, water as a service, treatment as a service, things like that are gaining traction because they're easy for sectors to buy, not just utilities, but, I see it in the industrial sector. That's a big part of it. We do need to really align digital transformation with business strategy for both utilities and the private sector. So ensuring that there is leadership, there is funding, leadership can answer the question, why are we doing this? Dragan always talks about the people side, the human side. I mean, we're the problem, but we're also the opportunity. Get people excited about digital technologies and innovation, and that requires embracing failure and accepting, just accepting that you will fail and giving them knowledge. So, again, my 2 cents.
Well, Will, maybe you or maybe Dragan or somebody else could follow up on that, because when you say we need different business models, the first thing that my head goes to is that's new companies, because the old companies almost never can change their freaking business models. And we're seeing it in every industry. And when Techonomy works with Cognizant and Wipro and IBM and all of them talk about how worried they are about the Fortune 1000, period. Because there's startups in every arena that are doing things more digitally, more efficiently, more inexpensively, and the big companies aren't moving fast enough. So Dragan, say something.
Can I just give examples of game changers? Airbnb changed tourism. Online banking changed how we bank. Uber changed how we hail transport. So we need those kind of companies in the water sector. And that's, I think, what Will was referring to, new business models.
But do we have those yet, or are they still to emerge?
There are a few, but Will probably knows more of them.
Well, no, I think we should all chime in. I find Transcend to be really interesting. And I just wrote a piece on innovation and disruptive innovation and creative destruction. And I would argue, and probably the CEO of Transcend, that what they're doing is disrupting the traditional engineering design process for water and wastewater treatment plants. And they're doing that through digital technologies and artificial intelligence. Well, that's breaking the status quo where big consulting engineering shops would bill hours to do that. That's not exciting. I don't know, Dragan, who else do you see that?
Yeah. Well, also, if these 50,000 generally municipally owned or public owned utilities are kind of fragmenting the entire landscape, it's hard to innovate for them, right? I mean, how does that intersection get resolved?
Well, you're also talking to public organizations. So if they need to be open to failure, but their failure results in people losing their homes, I mean, the politics behind that make it very difficult for cities to adopt something new and be open to fail. So there also has to be a balance in there as well.
Well, for one thing, the country and the cities and everybody has to get a lot more serious about recognizing the climate crisis.
Absolutely.
Which they really haven't been. And even we at Techonomy took us a while, but we're now on it. It's amazing. All of a sudden, there's all these tech conference companies are having climate events, which is great. But it is an urgent crisis. And we have to move really fast. And Dragan, I wanted to get you on the climate thing because I know Will said that this is something you've been talking about for a long time. And maybe we sort of do have to wind down in the near future. But when you think about climate and water, I mean, how do you talk about it and what do you think we should all be thinking about?
Well, I think COVID-19 showed us that we react quite well. You know, you take this with a pinch of salt, but well, as the global community to acute threats. But climate change and water crisis and this global water security shows us that we don't act quickly enough for endemic kind of situation, challenges that are going from generation to generation. And that's where we cannot kind of find that urgency, sense of urgency dealing with these issues. So nobody or anybody who hasn't been flooded doesn't actually think flooding is a big problem, unless you had it in your basement and in your house and you had to replace the whole bloody thing. So that's that sense of urgency that we need to bring about the climate and about water in general is something that is very, very difficult, particularly in the current political climate and the world situation at the moment. So that's my...
Good, really good. We have to end momentarily, but I think a lot about something that appeared in the New York Times a few weeks ago. It's one of those real estate insert magazines. I don't know if anybody saw this. Erin had to leave, by the way, so I'm saying farewell for her. You know those, they put those it was for the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And it was 30 pages and it was filled with multi-million-dollar homes and only some of them were even on stilts. And this is idiotic. And I meant to save it and I didn't, but it goes to show just how diluted a huge percentage of the people who are willing to spend $3 and $4 million for a house on a sandbar, who the hell are those people? And there's a lot of them. And there was the real estate company that bought the magazine. There's like 40 brokers in the back, big smiles on their face because they're making big commissions. This has got to end. I mean, the world is not getting it, how bad the water problem is. And that's just one very obvious example. But anybody have any urgent closing comments that, including you, Carl, you're still honorarily on screen. Anybody have, and Will, maybe we'll go to you last just because you were sort of the godfather of this session. Any of the rest of you got quick closing comments?
Just a quick one about the value and the price of water. I think that's one of the key challenges for all of us, that we all put very high value on water, whether water supply or protection from flooding, for example. But the price that we pay for it is not enough to support the level of and quality of service that we are receiving now. And you know that $1 trillion American is needed to invest in the water infrastructure just in the States. So that's one of the key also.
How much was that? How much money?
$1 trillion.
I was afraid that's what you said. That's a lot.
Yeah, and that's American Society of Civil Engineers. If you look into American infrastructure, they will say the grade is either C or D. I can't remember now what was the latest one.
I think
Carl,
just
do you have any closing thought? And Tom, you go ahead, please.
Yeah, just to add to what Dragan was saying, I think communicating the value of water to the wider public, that is something that just hasn't historically been done. And I think digital has an enormous potential to do that. You think about how people, I mean, you mentioned some of the examples earlier of disruption, Dragan, but actually, when do people actually interact with their water company? It's to pay a bill or to complain. I think on average, it's what, 9 minutes a year. It's so actually to increase the value of water, people have to realize the value of water, and digital has huge potential to do that.
Yeah, and I was going to add
Good.
too, I think this summer, I think we need, in the water sector, we need to get better at seizing, I call them moments of relevancy, and make it real. So when we're talking about financing for the Colorado River, we have a lot of news hooks, unfortunately, coming this summer with record drought and other points. So as the media picks up on this, and the media needs to be educated, we need to give them that, in a sense, that nut paragraph that they insert in every article. That's about climate, it's about aridification, and it's about, we have to insert some hope too. It's about investment and policy.
Sorry to
Good.
try, but there was a comment by Steve Cole saying, let's not forget we also have a water affordability crisis. In the UK, the unpaid bills are at the level of 2 billion UK pounds, which is, for a country of 65 million people, it's huge.
Chicago, it's 300 million.
What, unpaid water bills? Wow.
Mhm.
Okay, Will, wrap it up and take us home.
Yeah, so my friends and colleagues, one and the same here, touched on a couple of things I think are really important in terms of how do we break the status quo. It is storytelling. Speak in a way that the layperson understands, because we're in an echo chamber as professionals. The second, I'm a huge fan of running with what Dragan said. Democratize access to data and actionable information. Think about water tech as Uber. Think about it in a way that pushes information to each one of us and empowers us to make better choices. And right now we're going through regulatory agencies, and utilities, and it's not the only option anymore. So my two things, which.
Well, there's so much to discuss. I mean, it's been really, I think, a really fun conversation, despite it being slightly unpredictable. Thank you, Tom, for being quick on the draw and joining. Thank you, Dragan, for getting here. And Carl, thank you for letting me leave you on video. And Will, thank you especially for having the idea to do this in the first place for World Water Day. I think it was a apt way of honoring the day. And we will be on this topic more. Techonomy is going to stay on the climate theme for well beyond next Tuesday's Techonomy Climate Conference. But I would just reiterate, if anyone hasn't signed up, you can go to the regular registration and register for free virtually if you're not in the Bay Area next week, or you can come, and if you are in the Bay Area and the very modest price is too much for you, let me know and we'll figure out what we can do for you. It's going to be an amazing event, and look at the website, you'll see what I mean. But thank you again so much to everybody, and have a great World Water Day.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you,
Thank
David.
you, guys. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, David.
Economy team. Bye.